So even though you're far along in whatever way you're going, giving yourself the grace to pivot to a great opportunity and not allow yourself to feel the failure of the pivot. It's not a failure, it's a chosen path in a different direction.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if you are an avid listener of the show, I want you to leave us a rating and review so we can hear what you love about the show, but also, we'll take some feedback. We'll take a little bit there. So let us know anything we can do to work harder for your investing goals. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Tiffany Mittal. Tiffany Mittal is a multifamily owner, investor, and entrepreneur. Now, she has worked in the multifamily real estate industry for over 13 years, both as an owner-operator of multifamily apartments and as an executive in a property technology, also called PropTech. And her company in particular is called Utility Ranger. So, welcome to the show, Tiffany Mittal.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Tiffany, it's great to have you on the show. I went really high level with your bio. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Well, my name's Tiffany Mittal, and I'm a multifamily owner, investor, and I have a company called Utility Ranger, which is a prop tech company, which we created to kind of serve ourselves initially. And now that we're using it to sell to owners just like us.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's talk about your investing, right? How did you get into multifamily investing to start?
Well, I kind of fell into it because my husband actually has been in the business since he can remember. His family are owner operators of a portfolio in Los Angeles. And so when I met my husband, I started going in to help him with his apartments while I was in grad school. And when I got out of grad school, I realized the day-to-day operations of the apartments was not really my forte. I would say between bed bugs and tenant issues, I was like, this isn't my, area that I want to be in, but I really love the industry. So I actually went into the prop tech side of it, kind of out of a self need as well, for us, but also to, continue to be in the industry, but work more with owners and investors like ourselves.
So you talked about kind of the management side, right? And I think it's really interesting because one, you're talking about, these properties are out in LA and you were kind of helping them on the side. You kind of went into it and said, ooh, this really isn't my strength. So
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit more about that, right? Because I think sometimes people learn that about themselves I don't want to say when it's too late, but like you own the property as part of the business plan and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't what I expected. So talk us through that a little bit more about, some of the challenges that you faced in that operations role and maybe some of the ways you kind of you found to rectify that.
Yeah. So, the day-to-day operations, it's hard work, right? You have to go on site, meet your on-site managers. We're doing apartment turnovers, we had bed bug issues, and we have a lot of Section 8 residents. And so it was just cumbersome from an energy management side. It was just too much for me to handle. I wanted to deal more with people like my husband and professionals who were investing. I found that side a lot more interesting than the operations. And so, and also I would say my husband and I are both kind of alphas. And so when you work together and you're both alphas, you kind of have to find your own swim lanes, which we did for a little while, but you kind of always fall into each other's swim lanes a little bit here and there. And so I wanted to go into an area that's kind of adjacent to that, which is a technology side, which was a lot more interesting to me, and to figure out what kind of technology could we use on our properties to help scale our portfolio. And so that's kind of really what intrigued me into looking into the technology side of it. And then saying, okay, what are we having an issue with on our properties to date? Like, where do we need to create more efficiencies? Where do we need to create more value? And so the utility side of that was an area that continued to get brought up. We weren't doing any kind of utility bill back at the time. And we couldn't really find anyone to help us do utilities because we weren't large enough. We had 100 units. And unless we had 1,000 units, these utility billing companies were saying, we can't service you unless you want to pay a lot more and maybe be their tier 5 client, which nobody wants to be somebody's tier 5 client. So That's kind of what spurred me to go into technology, was just out of a need for trying to figure out the efficiencies, how to create more efficiencies and more value in our properties.
And did you have like a tech background that kind of enabled you here?
I didn't have a tech background, actually. I did my undergrad and my master's in business and global leadership. I've just always been very tech forward, I would say, maybe an early adopter of tech. So it's something that interested me, although I didn't know back then it would take me to where I'm at today. But, you know, I think if you just follow your passions, you kind of find your own way along the way.
Well, I think there are a couple things that stand out, right? So first of all, you and your husband had this 100 unit portfolio. You're out there in California and you're talking to, these utility companies, these utility billing systems, right? And you're talking to them about, hey, help us implement, RUBS or somehow to bill back these residents for their portion of utilities. And they're like, no, basically, if you don't have a
Yeah.
1,000 units, we're not going to waste our time with you. So you're here with 100 units, which is pretty sizable, and you can't get that help to implement this very helpful strategy. So you decide to go out there and try to create this thing for yourself. So talk to us about that. What does this look like, and how did you come up with the not so much the idea, but kind of the implementation and kind of the framework that ultimately became Utility Ranger?
What's funny is, so it's not even that I started off thinking I would solve the problem myself. It was more my husband and I saying, okay, no one will help us. So why don't you go and work for one of these companies and maybe they'll take us on by default. Right. And so I said, okay. So there was a company in San Diego. They had about 100,000 in revenue. I was employee number 4. They probably wanted me so I could give them my family's portfolio for business. But at the time, I helped grow that portfolio. I helped grow that company to 20 million in 5 years, and realized there was a huge need in the market for implementing RUBS, especially in the lower market, because again, no one will help, these smaller investors that just at such a disadvantage when it comes to trying to scale their portfolio. They just don't have the means to do so. So I went to work for one of these companies, and of course they took me on as a client by default. And what I realized was it wasn't so much just about billing your residents for utilities. Like, yes, that's the mechanism that you're using. It's actually about growth. And so, what I mean by that is when we started billing our one property in San Diego, it was 36 units. We got about 36,000 of additional revenue that year. So about $1,000 per year per unit. And so that 36,000 of additional revenue, when we went to go refinance the property with Freddie Mac the next year, they actually valued our property at $1 million more and gave us 500,000 cash out refinance, which then we were able to use and buy another property. And that really kind of hit the switch for us, saying, whoa, like if this does that for one property, like what does that look like across our whole portfolio? And if we were at such a disadvantage and now can see this growth, it's like a different value add strategy. Like, why are all the other small multifamily owners, no one will help them? No one can have the same advantage that the big guys have been having for years to help grow and scale their properties. And so that's when I started to really take a look back and say, okay, how can we really use this as a value add strategy? And it's funny, my sister, actually, who's in LA, she had about a dozen units and she saw what we were doing and she said, hey, help me, sign me on as a client. And I'm like, I can't sign you on as a client because you only have a dozen units. So I created a little Excel calculator to make it work for her. And her husband started billing their tenants for their utilities like water, sewer, trash, pest control, even. And then I said, you know what? If I can create this calculator for my sister to use and no one else is serving this kind of long tail of the market, why can't I do the same thing for other people to help them use this as a tool to grow and build their portfolio rather than just the traditional value add? We have to put so much capital into the property. You're taking something that doesn't cost you any money out of pocket and getting so much value increase. It's kind of silly not to do it. And the problem is the smaller units just weren't doing it because people wouldn't help them. So I said, you know what? It's not about going with these service providers who are going to, treat you poorly, not give you the service you need. they just need a tool to do it themselves. And so I was just like, I'm going to develop my own tool that not only me and my sister are going to use, but I'm going to give to other small investors and give them the same opportunity that we saw and help them grow their portfolio.
So let's talk high level real quick, right? Because
Yeah.
I think you're hitting on something really interesting. So one, when we talk about value add, a lot of times we're talking about renovating the property, driving up rents, right? We may
Mhm.
also talk about operational. So, maybe we can cut expenses somewhere. Maybe we can lower insurance or whatever the case may be, right? And in this case, we're talking about kind of that other income line item or
Mhm.
reducing the utility costs.
Mhm.
So here you're saying that a lot of these larger companies, they wouldn't service those, mom and pop type investors who have, less than 1,000 units, which is most investors, right?
Yeah.
So you were able to create kind of this solution for yourself and your business, but then also for your sister and other folks. Just one, why wouldn't they service something, smaller than 1,000 units? I mean, is there like a huge infrastructure investment that we're not aware of, or like why is that the cutoff?
Um, the 1,000 unit and under portfolios, they call the long tail of the market. These investors are hard to reach. The market's very fragmented, even though that market is very large. It's not like these people are advertising on LinkedIn, hey, by the way, I have, 100 units or I have 50 units. Most of them have a day job and then this is their side gig and they have some units on the side. Well, it's hard to reach those people. And so trying to find a node, right? Like who do all these people follow? And that's actually when I was starting the company. Actually, I left my fintech job I was in at the time. And my husband said, okay, here's $250,000. Like, let's go ahead and start the company. But a year later, I was out of money, half built software. And they said it was going to take another 500,000 and another year to finish building it. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot ask my husband for another $500,000 to build my software while I'm not working. And so I said, you know what, I need a partner. And I knew at the time that most of these investors, these smaller investors, they all follow Grant Cardone. He's just like the larger than life, like real estate investor teaching people how to do real estate investing in multifamily. And I said, he really needs to be my partner. And so I pitched my company to him and Jared Yellen, who owned the 10X incubator. And they said yes on the spot. And so they bought half my company on the spot. We finished our product and then we launched it in February of this year, actually. So we just launched it. And yeah. And your question was going back to why don't the other companies really service them? It's not just that the market is fragmented and hard to reach, but it's a very manual process. Most of these companies don't own their own software. So they license their software from a different provider. And the software is really clunky and not very user friendly. And so they're sending out manual bills. So they literally just have a lot of butts in chairs collecting utility bills from their clients, sending out, doing the actual billing and sending out paper bills to all the residents. I mean, it's just so manual and the process is the same, whether you have 500 units or 5 units. So where are you going to spend your time? So it's just a matter of it's such a manual process that you can't afford to really focus on the small investors. You have to go after the big whales because, that's just where the money's at. But, then you have
Yeah.
this huge underserved market now.
Yeah. Well, very manual process, taking in kind of those utilities, figuring out who pays what, and then sending
Mhm.
these physical letters back out to the residents. So to your point,
Yeah.
they're going to focus on those larger companies so they get one check. At least they know they're doing it for one property as opposed
Mhm.
to a whole fragmented list of mom and pop type investors. So that makes sense there. For those who don't really understand that process, though, you're
Mhm.
saying that there is a way to kind of create more of a tool, right? Which you've been able to do. Again, for those who don't understand as much, maybe just give us a little more context, right? Now, I want to come back to the Grant Cardone thing, but uh, what is this process, right? I mean, are you literally taking every utility bill, uploading it into the system, and then sending new bills out, or what exactly does this look like?
So, do you want me to tell you what the process traditionally is in the service companies or the process for utility ranger? Because they're widely different.
Sure, wherever you wanna go. I think most people don't like, most people probably don't know how any of it works. They just
Yeah.
know that you can build tenants for utilities. They try to find someone who helps them do it,
And then,
and that's it, right? So I would love to maybe hear maybe traditionally how it works
yeah.
and where you found some efficiencies.
So in the traditional kind of utility billing service provider model, you have to give them all your property information to set up your properties in the software. Then every month you collect your utility bills, you put them through your accounts payable department, or you pay the bills through auto pay, you send them your utility bills. But you can imagine every property has either a number of water bills, a number of sewer bills, a number of trash bills, and I mean, you have a lot of bills, right? So you have to make sure every property has all their bills. You're sending them off. They're reviewing them, but the people who are doing the billing, they don't own multifamily. If your bill is 2,000 one month for water and 3,500 the other month for water, if that doesn't get caught by them, you're going to bill out your residents a huge amount of money, and they're not looking at it like, oh, whoa, there might be a leak on the property, or you might have some running toilets. They're not looking at it in the same way that you would look at it. So then they're sending you back a pre-billing statement, and you're going through it going, oh, I forgot to add my rent increases, or the bills are too high. So send them back. And then they change, how much the owner pays versus how much the tenant pays. And they send them back. And this, you go back and forth multiple times between the person who's doing your billing before they actually send out the bills. And you get your bill in January, or for the month of January, you get your bill in February, you give it to them in February, they bill it out in March, you collect it in April, and you're like hoping by June, have I gotten my money back from, my bill in January? And
Right,
it
right.
just makes zero sense. And we just said, just cut out all of that process, right? That's just a pain in the butt. Nobody knows your properties better than you. You get your bill in the mail, or you get your bill via email. You take the total of your bill, you enter that into the utilities that are set up on the properties in our system. And whether that's water, sewer, trash, I mean, it could be a number of utility options that you have. And you just enter your bills and you click calculate, and you see all your residents, you see all their charges. And if everything looks good, then you send them off, and everything goes via email. There's payment links within the invoices themselves. And so if I have a bill for January, I've billed it in February, and I'm paid on that bill by March 1st. And so
I
you're
love it.
eliminating the length of time, you're eliminating all this back and forth. And it's literally like 3 clicks, and you've billed your residents. And so if we don't need these service companies to put us through that torment, and they don't want to service us anyways. So why not just do it ourselves? Why not just take control of it ourselves and make the money ourselves?
Well, and I think to your point, like it's one of those things when you think about billing for utilities in particular, you know, yes, you can install like water meters on, on every unit if you wanted to, but you don't have to install water meters to bill for utilities. There are other ways to do it based on what
Yeah.
you're talking about. So it's not necessarily like the physical infrastructure as much as it is being able to look at the numbers and then, literally break it up based on the appropriate ratio. So it's more of a, I don't want to call it Excel issue, but it is more of a
It's a
math
mathematical
issue.
equation.
Yes.
You can't divide it up equally. You have the little
Yeah.
grandma in one unit and a family of five next door. There's no way you could divide it up. And a lot of people, especially in the smaller market, because no one will help them, they'll just do a flat fee. They'll just say, oh, well, I'll just add $40 a month on top of the rent. But essentially, you're just adding a rent increase, and the residents know you're adding a rent increase, but you're not changing or modifying the behavior of your residents. Because if you think about it, you go to a hotel and your shirt's a little wrinkly, and you hang it up in the shower, and you shut the door, and you turn on the hot water, shut the door, and we all steam our shirts, because it comes with the cost of our hotel room, right? Well, our residents do the same thing. I had a resident at one of my properties, and we implemented the program. My husband thought we were going to have a flurry of move outs, but we ended up just having a flurry of maintenance requests. But we had a lot of residents calling saying, my neighbor next door has her water on all day. We go into the unit, she's not even there. We wait for her to come back from work. My manager goes in there and says, what's going on? Why are you leaving your shower on all day? She said, well, my dog has anxiety, and if I leave and I don't turn the shower on, my dog barks. And you're like, I'm footing the bill for this. Like, that's crazy. Like, and so even if the residents get a $10 bill or a $30 bill or whatever it is, they're going to think twice about leaving their shower on before they leave for work, or they're going to think twice about turning off the sink when they're brushing their teeth. They're not going to do a load of laundry with one or two items in it. You're going to think about it differently when you're accountable for how much you're using. Now, again, we don't have sub meters on the properties. There's a lot of capital output for sub meters. There's a lot of regulations around sub meters, and there's a lot of ongoing maintenance regarding sub meters. But what you're collecting back in return is pretty negligible. So why put out the big capital output unless you either are required to or you want to? You can get the same return using a ratio utility billing system, is what RUB stands for. You can get that same return with zero money out of pocket. And what you're trying to do is going to happen whether you put a sub meter on or whether you do a mathematical formula. It's changing and modifying the behavior of your residents to conserve at the property level while getting that utility reimbursement revenue, putting that on your top line to offset your utilities on your expense line, and see that increase of your revenue come in, and then use that increase to leverage it to buy more properties.
I think there's two big takeaways from what you said. One is really the psychological impact of having the tenants themselves be accountable for the utilities. So
Yeah.
instead of just that flat 30, 40, $50 charge, and residents not caring what happens because they're going to pay that $40 no matter what,
Mhm.
if they're literally getting a bill that varies every month based on actual usage, they're going to think twice about just leaving things running, or these kind of things, leaving the lights on. I don't know how you were as a kid, but there's an old joke about, like, you walk into a room, you go out to grab some real quick, and your dad might follow you and turn all the lights off that you keep turning on, right? Like,
Yeah,
my dad was notorious for that. He kept
yeah.
the heat didn't come on till a certain time of the year, and if you left the light on, he was gonna make sure you knew about it, right? But he was really about make sure those utility bills were down.
Yeah.
And you want to encourage that behavior because as an owner, it impacts you two ways. Yes, there's the revenue from the tenants paying for the utilities that's covered. But if you can keep those costs down, that's going to be very attractive, and it's going to allow you not to put as much capital out there anyway. So there's really two different benefits of it. And it's not just, passing along the expense, but also kind of, I don't call it training, but making sure residents understand that, hey, we all need to work together to try to keep these costs in line, particularly where you were in California. I can imagine those utility bills
So
were through the
the
roof. So
water rates had gone up 70 to
yeah,
80% over a 5 to 7 year period. And it's like you can't raise the
yeah.
rent enough to continue to cover the utilities increasing, because the increases are just so astronomical. There's no way. And I would have a lot of, friends in the industry say, well, I'm, my rent includes my utilities, but I'm at market rate. And I'd be like, really? You're at market rate? Well, if you're at 1,500 and I'm at 1,500 and I'm not including my utilities and you are including your utilities, your net effective rent is probably more like 14, 20. And my effective rent is much closer to 1,600. Like, how do you compete in that market when all the big players in the market are billing for utilities separately? It's kind of like if you look at different industries and when you have a commoditization of pricing. So let's say rental rates, people start to unbundle. Like, look at the airline industries, they unbundled their baggage fees. You see it in hotels and resorts now, they're unbundling the resort fee, right? Because they got to get that initial price point is what people are buying off of, not all these other fees. It used to be like, how many amenities do you have in your apartment? That was the driver. But really, for a while, the driver's been the rent. So if you're advertising at 1,000 and I'm advertising at 1,000 or even 950, if I'm not including my utilities, I'm going to get 10 times more traffic than you are just to look at my unit. And I'm effectively charging more than you are. So it's really about how does your unit, how is it perceived in the market? You have to compete with all the big players who are charging separately for billing their utilities. And so if you want to compete in that market, you have to kind of follow that model, start to unbundle those rates a little bit, charge your rent plus all these other, whether it's water, sewer, trash, pest control. I have clients who do it for cable. They're doing like a big
Mhm.
Wi-Fi on the property and then selling the Wi-Fi passwords monthly for those who want to opt in for the Wi-Fi. And you have to have a mechanism to bill for that because all of these things are generating NOI growth. And the NOI growth is really where you want to be at so you can then grow your portfolio.
I love that breakdown and those examples, right, on the unbundling, because you're spot on, and I think it's really important for our operators, particularly mom and pop operators, but really for anybody.
Mhm.
If you're looking at rent, let's just use $1,000 as an easy number. If one has utilities included and one does not have utilities included, well, yes, that $1,000 one is going to be more attractive, but you have to understand when it comes to foot traffic and what you can advertise. First of all, if you are including your utilities, if it's truly an apples to apples unit, right, an apples to apples comparison, it's not 1,000 and 1,000, right? The
Mhm.
utilities, if they're $50, one is advertising $1,000 rents with $50 utilities. The other is advertising $1,050 rent with heat or utilities included, right? Well, a resident's going to see one unit listed at 1,000, one unit rented at or listed at 1,050. They're going to go to that $1,000 unit first and look at it and go through the pictures and all that kind of stuff and tour it. And then they'll see, oh, there's an additional $50 fee for this or $50 for that. And it's important to understand all of those little things. And I think as real estate investors, we like to think we're really savvy and we're not going to fall prey to these kind of little tricks, right? I will tell you, as a person who just booked a flight, a few weeks ago, I kind of got hung up on this because I booked a flight and it wasn't until I got to the final stage to add my baggage or my luggage. And the luggage was actually more expensive than my ticket. And I was shocked. That's why I had to end up going back and canceling it. And I'm like, well, if I'm gonna do that, I'll just get the one I really want.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you how that loss leader works, right? So you
Mhm.
get them in the process, you get them clicking, you get them vested, and then at a certain point, yes, they will come to the realization that, okay, I've got to pay additional for utilities. But at that point, they've already looked at all the pictures, they're already comfortable with the
Yep.
location, they're kind of vested, and it's easier to make that happen. So as a marketer and as a salesperson, it is a great strategy. But even when it comes to the business and the operations to drive that NOI, it is a phenomenal tool that you want to employ, particularly if you need to stand out and get an edge in your market. I
Mhm.
want to go back to what you were talking about before, though, right? So you mentioned getting $250,000 from your husband,
Mhm.
to build this business. You're going into it. You realize you need another $500,000. You kind of said it almost flippantly that, you know what? This Grant Cardone guy, a lot of people follow him. I'm just going to pitch Grant, right? I'm sure it was more steps involved than you just doing that. So walk us through that process. I mean, did you just call Grant one day and say, "Hey, I got a great idea for you," or kind of walk me through what happened there?
It's actually really funny. So I read his 10X book probably, I would say maybe 2010. I followed him, but I hadn't really been continuing to follow him. And as social media grew, he was starting to grow on social media. But it was during COVID where, I'd worked for a number of prop tech companies, had gotten a really great fintech job, and really just hated fintech. I was like, I can't work another single day because I don't care if my payment goes through 30 seconds faster. Like I was creating real value for apartment owners before. Like this isn't creating enough value for me. And I wanted to help more people like myself. And so I said, I can't work another single day on someone else's stuff. I have to do my own thing. I have this calling. I just have to do it. And so my husband, he had been hearing about this for a number of years at this point and said, okay, I know you're unhappy. I have this other stuff that I'm working on. I really need you to help me in the business anyway. So why don't you do this as well while helping me in the business? I said, okay. So I started that. They promised me it was going to be done in a year with this amount of money. And then you realize that software development's never, especially as a non-technical tech founder, I had been working in product and working in technology, but it's different when you're not the one coding, right? So
Yeah.
you can only get so far without getting more people on your team. And so I'd seen one of the business boot camps and pitched my company in one of the pitch contests initially, and then made it to the top 10, was so excited, and then bombed on stage in front of them and totally thought I was never going to be partnered with him again. But I get really like focused, like laser focused, like he has to be my partner. I know he's the node. This is why no one's succeeding in this, long tail, is because no one's focusing on the nodes. So 6 months later goes by, the software company tells me it's going to be another $500,000 in another year. And I'm realizing, oh my God, I can't go this route. And then Jared Yellen and Grant Cardone partnered up to create 10X Incubator, which was taking napkin ideas and turning them into tech companies. But I was a little bit further along in my process than most, but I said, oh my gosh. And I just knew from like the depths within me, like, this is it. This is my chance. And so I filled out the form online. They scheduled an appointment with me a few weeks later. I did the whole thing. It was about an hour long. And he said, look, I am going against all of our rules. We never do this, but I want to offer you a deal on the spot. And I
I
was
love
like,
it.
ah! It was just like a dream come true. He's like, think about it. I'm like, you have to think about it. Like, I'm all in. And and then it just was a whirlwind. I mean, their whole back, team, like, it's like you give your product, your tech transfer to this, 10X ecosystem, and they're like machines over there. They're amazing. And literally they had the product finished in 6 months.
Wow.
And it was an amazing experience. We got investment on board, and I mean, they really just kind of helped and handhold you through the entire process. And yeah, so now we're launched, and we're starting to get out of our beta phase and getting our clients on board, and doing a lot of speaking, and reaching as many small multifamily owners as I can.
So, just for those folks who are listening, first of all, phenomenal story, and love that you were able to go out there and have that tenacity to not give up and pitch and make that work as far as the partnership goes. Talk to us about the ideal customer for Utility Ranger. Like, who are you looking to connect with, and who is Utility Ranger uniquely positioned to help?
Well, I would say we're not for, the multifamily owners who are just happy collecting their rents and go on their way every day. We're really targeting the owners who have multifamily units, who are looking to grow, who are looking for a different value add strategy to add to their toolbox. This isn't the only strategy people use, but this is a great value add, no money out of pocket, instant equity grab right out the gate. So people who are looking to grow. So owner operators, small property management companies, people who have like typically under 1,000 units that don't have enough buying power to have the technology companies pay attention to them, or the service companies pay attention to them. I would say ideally is probably anywhere from 20 to 300 units is kind of that ballpark where you're really starting to look at efficiencies and really wanting to grow. But really, the software is made for anyone. I mean, it could be used in HOAs for doing your HOA dues and pulling the utilities out of that. I mean, it can be used in a number of ways. It's basically using a software to triple net your apartments. Like, triple net in a commercial sense is you pay for all of these things outside, and you pay a fee almost like an HOA do, but it's all your fees that you have to pay for anyways in commercial. So it's almost like you're renting the airspace, right, in multifamily, and you're charging for all the other things that come along with it.
I love it. Well, listen, if you want to learn more about that, go to utilityranger.com. And then Tiffany, if they want to follow you, you're all over social media at Tiffany Mittal on Instagram, Facebook, all those social channels. So we'll make sure we link to that in our show notes. We're
Thank
going to
you.
move on to our round of insights. Are you ready?
Yes.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Um, at the time, I would say I initially didn't go to college right after high school. My parents just didn't have the money to send me. And so I felt initially like I couldn't do it, right? And everybody else was going straight to college. So I actually became a hairstylist, and was successful, actually owned a salon at 22 with 20 employees. And then when I decided to go back to grad school, I decided to sell my business. And it was somewhat defeating to say I was young and I started this business with 20 employees. It was 2008, and I was actually lucky to sell it about 4 days before the first bailouts were announced and the economy imploded. So I was lucky to get out of that business, but initially it felt somewhat of a failure. But I think giving yourself grace to pivot when something else is an opportunity. There's so many times where, people getting into real estate investing. Well, I'm so far along in my career, right? Like I don't want to switch. But knowing that, if you really want to create financial freedom, real estate's the best way of doing it. Multifamily is the best way of doing it. So even though you're far along in whatever way you're going, giving yourself the grace to pivot to a great opportunity and not allow yourself to feel the failure of the pivot. It's not a failure; it's a chosen path in a different direction.
I love it. Outside of Utility Ranger, give me the digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Um, Mobile resource, that's a different one. I would say we have our properties managed by a third party management, and so I think they're using Appfolio, and but they're much larger than we were independently, so it's much harder to use these software platforms. So that's I would say my property management software of choice. But Ranger could go into Rental Ranger one day. Who knows?
There you go. All right, give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
I think one of my favorites is either 10X, because I love that book. It kind of started me there. But I love the one, I think it's Find Your Why or Start with Why, of figuring out why you're doing what you're doing and why you're in business. I think kind of leading with that, and it makes you feel a lot more authentic. I love telling people my story. I love telling people why we even went down this path of starting a tech company. And I think that helps exude, the authenticity of your brand. It's not just about selling things. It's not about that at all. It's about helping people and showing this is the model that we did, and maybe this can help you too.
Yeah. What's a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
So we recently moved to Florida, and the weather is so nice here and it's so flat. So my my husband and I, we walk probably about 5 to 7 miles a day, and we use that time to really download, like, what are we doing? Like, we have 5 properties that we sold 2 of them. We have 3 more that are coming due right now, that we're going to sell those and change our investment strategy over to Florida and 1031 those assets. But you have to, like, constantly be in touch with what's going on. So we use these walks to really download of, okay, what do we have to do next? Where are things at? And it really helps us stay focused on our goals. We like to set annual goals. And I would say we haven't gone a year and not achieved them, but half the time it's just writing them down and having some kind of daily routine that helps you kind of see where you're at.
Give me your number one insight for real estate investing.
Use RUBS as a value add strategy in your toolkit.
There you go. Love it. All right. Well, you talked about that transition moving from California to Florida. So I'll let you pick either location, but give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Ooh, my new favorite place in Florida is actually over by Juno Beach. So we're in Stewart. So we're about 30 minutes north or 45 minutes north of West Palm. But there's a little place in Juneau called Captain Charlie's Reef Grill, and it is amazing. Anytime we go down south, we're a lot of apartment hunting down south from where we're at. We always stop by on the way home. It gives us an excuse to eat there again.
Well, there you go. We'll make sure we link to that one in the show notes. Listen, Tiffany, you gave us a lot of great insight. I really appreciate your time and sharing information about your journey, getting your 100 units with your husband and going through some of the challenges you guys face, implementing kind of a utility bill back system, and then ultimately creating your own, being able to do that, leveraging the technology, creating kind of this tool, partner up with the 10X incubator program and Grant Cardone to kind of get this thing off and running. And now this is rolled out, it's available. And again, anybody wants to learn more, you can go to utilityranger.com. And if you want to connect with Tiffany, you can go check her out on any one of the social media platforms. It's Tiffany Mittal. So make sure we link to a couple of those in our show notes. Tiffany, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.